Friends, I have something I need to say before we jump into the episode. I've always said on the show that one of the things I value the most about my relationships with other people is their willingness to be real with one another. I want to take a moment to be real with you guys. The last few weeks have been pretty rough for me. I've been depressed, anxious, pessimistic, and just generally not okay. I've struggled with increasing dysphoria, feelings of loneliness, issues with my body, and a myriad of other things. I don't say this because I want pity or sympathy, but simply because I don't ever want this show to seem like this is, well, look at Callie and Jonathan and Daniel, and look how much they've got it together. I don't ever want a listener to this show to put me or my co-host on a pedestal. At the end of each show, I encourage you all to reach out if you're struggling, and I say that recognizing how hard it can be. Sometimes it's really hard for me to let my friends be there for me for fear of feeling like a burden or feeling like I failed in living up to the image I sometimes try to project as this totally together person who's got it together and has all this valuable advice and perspective to give. What's gotten me through this so far has been some kind words from listeners of the show and lots of love for my friends and family. Everybody struggles and everybody needs support. So more than anything, this is a gentle reminder to please reach out to someone if you're struggling. I've learned that I don't have to go through anything alone, and I want you to know that you don't have to either. If you feel like you have no one, I promise you that you're wrong. Jonathan, Daniel, and I are here even if no one else is. We are no better, smarter, or wiser than anyone else, but we have lots of love to give and perfectly good shoulders for crying on. That said, let's get to the show. Coming to you on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, debate, and discussion at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Moore.
Hello.
And Daniel Wolfsong.
Hi, everyone.
Today's episode is a big one. In this episode, we're going to tackle the subject of coming out. If I've learned anything for certain after being involved in LGBT and atheist activism, even for this short time I've been involved, it's that the LGBT closet and the atheist closet aren't so different from one another. In fact, I think it's accurate to say that everyone has a closet to come out of at some point in their lives. There's a great TED Talk by a woman named Ash Beckham, and she says something in the talk that I think is super important. She says, all a closet is a hard conversation. And although our topics may vary tremendously, the experience of being in and coming out of the closet is universal. It's scary, and we hate it, and it needs to be done. I have many friends who are in a closet of one kind or another because they don't feel safe or comfortable having those hard conversations. And my intent isn't to shame those folks or admonish them into coming out for the sake of the movement and forget their own personal safety and comfort. My purpose here is to tell their stories so they know they're not alone and to help create a world where those conversations aren't so hard so no one feels like they have to live in a closet anymore. We have two conversations we want to share with you today. One is with Lydia Allan, who's a co-host of Dogma Debate, and the other is with Danielle Muscato, who is Communications Director for American Atheists and a recently out trans woman. Lydia Allan is a co-host of Dogma Debate. She has several degrees, including a bachelor's in psychology and philosophy and master's degrees in neurobiology and the history of ideas. She's made several references to her struggles in leaving her faith on Dogma Debate, and listening to her describe the way that she felt during that time was the first time it ever struck me that sometimes you can literally replace the religious language in these stories with language about sexuality or gender and be telling the same story. So, Lydia, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So talk to me a little bit about what your journey was like coming out of faith.
Well, first of all, it was a long journey because it took me a long time to reject various elements of my faith. I kind of started out with like moving towards Christianity light,
right?
And trying on more progressive Christianity as I moved along. And then there came a point where I kind of hit a wall and had to face up to what my metaphysical commitments were going to be. That whole process took probably, I would guess, about 5 to 7 years. And it's funny because I was capable of letting go of God before I was actually capable of letting go of my own soul. That was the last thing supernatural that I let go of because I was scared to have no soul. Because you hear them say, oh, you've got no soul, and they mean something horrible by it, But yeah. That was the very last thing. It implies that somehow you're inferior, that you're not quite human. And it was, for me very frightening to have anyone think that about me, that I wasn't somehow fully human with fully human emotions and capabilities. So that's kind of the nutshell of the journey for me. Of course, I kept my atheism to myself for a while because I just didn't know how to talk to other people about it, because I live in Texas, which is pretty religious down here, and not just religious, but not particularly progressive in their views, a lot of right-wing conservatives down here. So it wasn't really until after my grandmother passed away that I was really capable of telling my family, hey, I'm really not a Christian anymore. And not only am I not a Christian anymore, I don't have any sort of belief system that is supernatural anymore. I do have a belief system, it's just not one that's supernatural. So that's kind of been the process. And of course, I grew up in a pretty religious family. I've got 3 ministers in my family, active ministers in my family, who all tried to reconvert me back to Christianity and to save my soul again. And I think I just had to tell them, no matter how you try to intellectualize it for me, I've been, all the things that you're throwing at me, I've thought about, I've talked to other people about, I've seen in works of, philosophy or literature, or science, or whatever. And you just don't have what I need to answer the really tough questions that I needed answered 5 years ago. So that's really, I think, the whole of it. Summed up as best as I can.
So, one thing that that really struck me listening to on Dogma Debate, I think it was the guy who was on that was drunk.
And Paul, yes.
Yeah, and he said something about if you give God a chance, he'll show himself to you. This whole idea that just assuming that an atheist has never given God a chance. And and your response to that, I was literally like, because I was driving I was like cheering. So if you could just sort of respond to that again, because I loved hearing you talk about that.
Thank you. I think what I said, if I remember correctly, because it's, I've done so many episodes of Dogma Debate now, it stuff kind of runs together for me. But you can jog my memory if I'm not going down the path that you remember. But I think what I must have said was something to the effect of, I went through some pretty tough stuff in my deconversion, and I've been living with depression for about 20 years now. And, I've been on my knees begging for the suffering to end, and, God didn't have it for me. So that pain, that kind of like reaching out to really nothingness, was, it was at the time it felt like a slap in the face. It felt like a betrayal. But, logically speaking, it's like, of course, if you reach out to nothing's going to respond. So, I did give God every chance. I had people pray over me. I had entire churches pray over me. I had good friends pray over me. I prayed. I searched my heart for bitterness. I searched my heart for anger. I searched my heart for sin. I searched the Bible in every conceivable corner of the Bible to find the answer about why I couldn't just be happy, and that's one of the stigmas of depression. People say, why can't you just be happy? And it's like, because there's something wrong with my brain, that's why.
Right.
Coming to the understanding of what depression is and coming to the understanding of how to treat it and how to cope with it was a scientific process, and so there was never going to be any answered prayer in that regard. But yeah, I think at one point I kind of felt like that God was, if God was a parent and parents love their children, I'm like, how can any parent do this to their child? Like, how can anyone watch someone suffer this way and be unaffected or unmoved by it, or at the very least do nothing about it? So that's really sort of two sides to my deconversion story. There's the emotional side, and then there's the intellectual side. And they both function together to make the whole story. It's harder for me to tell the emotional side because it's more vulnerable, as you can imagine.
Sure.
But I think it's important. I think it's very important to tell that side of the story, because if I just tell people the intellectual side of, I read the Bible and I took psychology classes and I studied neurobiology and I studied 2,500 years of Western philosophy, if I just tell that side of the story, it's a bit a bit dry or a bit, I don't know, perhaps misleading might be the word a little bit, but it doesn't tell the whole story or paint the whole picture. I was on that desperate search through all of that information because I was looking for answers that I couldn't find. Or at least the answers that I found were not what I expected them to be. So.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because I think a lot of times the atheist community, we get obsessed with rationality and logic and reason, and obviously those things are important. But we're also human beings. We can't take our emotions and our feelings out of the equation. And I mean, I've known people, extended family members who, when I came out as trans, like they're like, well, this is something I'm never going to understand. But I mean, if you're happy, So like, I mean, I can accept that.
Okay. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the intellectual side of your deconversion. What was sort of planted the seeds of doubt? What sort of led you out?
Well, as I said, I was really struggling with a lot of emotional pain, and so my church, I was Baptist, so and I also attended other sorts of evangelical churches, but mostly I would consider myself evangelical, leaning towards a somewhat fundamentalist approach. My approach wasn't lock, stock, and barrel fundamentalist evangelical. I was still a feminist. I was still pro-choice. I mean, I still had things about me that were kind of not what the church would have agreed with. But in any case, my church encouraged me to search the Word and to ask hard questions of appropriate authorities that I had access to. And so I did that. I did exactly that. I actually met with a professor that I knew through my, I guess at the time I was starting out in philosophy. It was right before, actually no, I think it was, sometimes my times get mixed up because some of this stuff all runs together for me. But I met with a professor. It was right before I went off to do my degree in philosophy at UT Austin. So I was right at the beginning of that phase of the philosophical searching. I had just ended the phase of neurobiology searching. So and I met with him for about a year, and he was somebody that had a PhD in applied ethics from Rice University. He was also a devout Christian. And so I would ask him, we met every week for, at least 2 semesters, and I would ask him hard questions, and I'd say, I don't understand this. And he would, do his best to sort of answer as intellectually honestly as he could and to give me references to read and things to think about. And then I went on to move to Austin. I was at Dallas at the time. I went on to move to Austin. And through the course of that degree, that philosophy degree, I encountered things like the 3 big arguments for the existence of God, which would be the argument from design, which is also called a teleological argument, the ontological argument, and that kind of thing, the cosmological argument. These are sort of the 3, traditionally big arguments that are deductive sort of arguments for the existence of God, and I found them extremely lacking. I was like, wait, this is the best you've got? Really? This argument is defeatable. This argument, you can take it apart. If this over here is not been shown to be true, the whole argument falls apart. And so it boiled down to faith. It boiled down to needing to have faith. And I couldn't, if we define faith as having confidence in a source, I couldn't trust my source because my source had not taken care of my depression. My source had not answered any of my prayers or any of the prayers of anyone who prayed over me. And what was there to have faith in at that point? So I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it any further. I was like, there's not even a good logical reason to stay. I was willing to stay if there were good logical reasons for me to stay, even if my emotions had been tested and my faith was lacking. But there just wasn't. There wasn't even a good argument. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I find apologetics so frustrating today. And you hear me on Dogma Debate talking to apologetic types.
Oh, I do, and I love it so much.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me because I'm like, believe me, life for me, personally for me, would be easier if there were a God.
Right.
There were so many existential crises that would resolve themselves immediately if that were the case for me. But the fact of the matter is that those arguments, all of them are, in my mind, defeatable. They rely on poor evidence. They rely on a loose definition of evidence or a very broad definition of evidence that I find unacceptable. They rely on, in some senses, a sort of a circularity that involves faith. You know, they start with their faith and then they go back and try to prove their faith. It's unacceptable to me. It wouldn't withstand any sort of rigorous, it doesn't withstand any rigorous examination. Obviously, if it did, it would have withstood my rigorous examination when I went through it the first time. So that's kind of the intellectual side of things for me.
Gotcha. So and when you finally came to a point where you said, I mean, and obviously deconversion is not a, you wake up one day and holy crap, I'm an atheist, but you know, when you got to the point when you realized like, wow, like this word fits now, what did that process look like for you as far as, you know, coming out to your friends, to your family, to your social circles? Like how did you go about doing that, and what was the sort of reaction that you got?
Well, I was afraid because, like I said, there's a lot of social stigma and a lot of social pressure regarding religion, especially where I live in Texas. I'm in Dallas, which is, you know, got at least 3 or 4 mega churches I can think of off the top of my head. So what it started to look like at first, well, I was married at the time. I'm divorced now, and I was married to a man who is a Christian. He is a pretty progressive Christian, and he was never the kind to pressure me to believe one way or another. In fact, as I started to lose my faith, he was okay with that. That was never really too much of an issue with him. But I couldn't really sort of talk to him about it, because to whatever I might have said about the doubts I had, he would say, I hear you and I understand you, but I still believe, which for me was frustrating because now I didn't have an ally, even in my home, to go with me on this journey of disbelief, which was scary for me. So I reached out to some online communities, and I became a regular commenter. I tried a couple of different places. I found Farangula to be just a little too crazy for me. It was a little too much vitriol. And although I thoroughly respect and enjoy that blog, I'm not trying to put it down in any way. I just couldn't find what I needed there exactly. And then, I looked at a couple of other places, and I ended up settling on a blog that isn't really kind of around anymore. That was called Unreasonable Faith, and I became an active participant at that blog and regular commenter and a commenter in the forums, and came to know some people online through that to help me sort of solidify this new place that I was in. And then I was angry for a while, too. And they allowed me a place to safely express that anger and disappointment. And after about 2 years of that, I decided that what I really needed to overcome my anger and to kind of move on from the grieving process of God was I needed to become friends with some Christians again. So I started commenting pretty regularly on another blog called Jesus Needs New PR, which is run by Matthew Paul Turner, who's a pretty progressive Christian who points frequently a critical eye at the church and how it poorly reflects his interpretation of Jesus as a social justice advocate. So, and Matt and I became friends through that process because he understood the anger that I felt towards the church. He feels, I think, in a lot of ways, the same kind of anger towards the church. And although he still maintains and retains a belief in God, there's a lot that we have in common as far as our morals go and what we want to see happen in the world to make it a better place. And he never stopped me from saying there were times I said very harsh things on his blog about Christianity and about God. And I asked some of the very hard questions that I had asked years before, because there were several pastors that were regulars on his website. And he was always so gracious when people would try to shut me up or to shut me out. He would be like, no, Lydia's part of this community, and although she does not believe as I believe, I think her questions are important. And so it gave me a safe place among Christians to exercise frustrations, concerns, but also to begin to start that journey of healing of, because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life being angry at Christians. I have an entire family full of Christians. I live in a state full of Christians. I just didn't want to be angry forever. So those are sort of the two big places that I thought online. And once I felt secure with people that I kind of didn't know had the mask of invisibility of, internet invisibility with, that's when I began to test it out on friends and family. Once I'd had that chance, it took me several years to be like, okay, now I have a better idea of what I actually believe, and I feel more confident in inhabiting it. That's when I began to really look for a community here in Dallas, and I joined the FOF, Fellowship of Free Thought, here in Dallas, and began to know people in person rather than just online. Began to come out to my friends and talk to them occasionally about Christianity. Some of my older friends who've known me for years, it's still a bit of a hard conversation to have. But, I've surrounded myself now with people who are more like me. Either we share values and they're still Christians, but we at least share the social justice values, or they're non-believers. So, and the final step in the whole process was, of course, being invited to be on a pretty popular podcast.
Right.
David's show. Up until that point, I existed in pretty relative obscurity because I worked at a university, and whatever I may have said or thought was, was very limited to a small group of people who knew me pretty well. And now I'm on this podcast pretty regularly where I talk to large audiences, and anybody on the internet can search for me and find those words. They can see what I have to say. It is out there now, and that's okay. It's a little scary for me sometimes. I worry that some people in the private parts of my life will find that and read it and be judgmental, but overall, it's okay.
Yeah, that's being vulnerable is hard. Even no matter how convicted you are and how sure of yourself you are, it's really tough to put yourself out there like that. And I mean, that's something that I still, when I do a podcast episode that gets in any way super personal, like I get super nervous before I click the send button sometimes still.
Yeah.
So I hear you. So, To kind of wrap things up a little bit, so the episode is about coming out, and we all know people who are closeted, whether it's because they're LGBT or because they're struggling with their faith or coming out of their faith. I have a lot of friends who, I have some friends who I'm one of like 3 people in their life that know that they're trans. So. And some of those folks listen to this show. So
okay.
If you could say anything to someone who is in the closet, what message would you give?
Well, I would start by saying that being different is scary, and I fully understand that, because part of being human is belonging to a larger group, and that sense of belonging is important and it matters. And so I would never dismiss it. That the sort of the instinct and the urges that we have to be with other people are normal and good, and that that it can be very frightening to be the person who is bearing the weight of that difference. And I do understand that, not as fully. I don't understand it in a truly trans sense or gay, LGBT sense. But I do understand it in terms of, having a lifestyle, if you will, and not that I am going there, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That is slightly controversial for a number of people who have committed themselves to certain moral positions, and have ugly things to say about people who don't line up with those moral positions. So my advice is, number one, it is so important to search your own heart and your own self, to say what I believe is valid, what I feel is valid, and how I want to exercise my personality and my life and my choices is valid, and to really give yourself room to absolutely love yourself. I think that's the first and foremost thing. You have to start with some form of self-love, because if you are still listening to those societal messages that tell you that you're not worthy, that you're inferior somehow, or that you're too different to be acceptable, that that right there is going to, it'll eat you from the inside, and you can't let that happen. So you have to start with that strong sense of, I believe in what I'm doing. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is you have to find a community however you need to do it. I don't know if it needs to be online, if it needs to be in person, if it needs to be a support group, a counselor, whoever it needs to be. You have to have other people to whom you can go and be safe. So those are the two things that I think are absolutely vital in a coming out situation, is that you have to have a strong, or at least developing a strong sense of self-love, and you have to have people you can go to when you need help or when you need support. So if you are thinking about coming out, I would recommend putting those two things in place first.
Awesome. Well, listen, I know you're super busy. You got a lot of stuff going on, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and being so open and honest with your story. That's not an easy thing for anyone to do, so I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you, Callie, for having me on the show, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to include me in what I think is very important work that you're doing here. So I appreciate you as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, you're doing awesome stuff, so keep doing it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that one thing that's great about our communities, the atheist community, the LGBT community, is that I think that we are allies with each other. And it's important. I will always be a source of support for you, and you, I hope, will always be a source of support for me. So,
absolutely. Yay. Without question. Without question.
Awesome. All right. Then.
Well, thank you again. That's all I got. I know you got a ton going on. So just thank you. More Gaytheist Manifesto coming up.
I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and I believe that reaching out for help is the bravest thing a person can do. If you are struggling and need support, call the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386. It's free and confidential, and trained counsellors are there to listen 24/7 without judgment. To learn more about the Trevor Project's life-saving work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning young people, go to thetrevorproject.org.
Danielle Muscato is a writer, activist, and public speaker. A former Christian praise and worship musician, she has been active in the atheist movement since 2009 and with American Atheists since 2013. On November 17th, 2014, Danielle posted a guest blog on Hemet Meta's Friendly Atheist blog publicly coming out as transgender. Danielle, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm happy to be on. Thanks.
So, what I really wanted to talk about is, as someone who already had lots of visibility within the atheist movement, just sort of what your experience coming out was like, and what the general response that you received from folks in the movement.
Okay, so my decision to come out kind of all at once was more predicated on the fact that I had to.
Right.
Because my job is so visible, it's not like I could just start painting my nails and start, dressing different. I mean, people would immediately ask questions, so I had to have a reason for that up front and be open about it. I guess I should say that as is the case with everybody who comes out with something like this, it is an ongoing process. There are still people who don't know. There are people who knew way before that post on Hemet's blog. I told probably 100 or so of my friends privately before that. My family knew before that, and so on. My work obviously knew before that. We kind of planned the exact day that I would post the guest post and so on. And but as far as your question about how atheists and especially the atheist community specifically responded overwhelmingly with support. That's not anything that I didn't expect. I really didn't get any negative responses from the atheist community. I think the only thing that I saw that wasn't very positive was somebody saying, "This is news."
Right.
Like, why? Well, not in the sense that it was obvious necessarily, but more in the sense that this is a private thing about that person, and why, it's not that big of a deal, it's except as an update type of thing. I get a lot of hate mail every day from Christians, and that hasn't changed. Now it also includes transgender slurs, but the only negative stuff that I've gotten has been from religious people, mostly Christians, and that's really, I think, mostly just because most of the U.S. religious population is Christian. Not to pick on Christianity, but
right.
That's just a fact of demographics, yeah.
Right. Yeah, not that picking on Christianity is a thing we want to do. I mean,
yeah.
So, yeah, because one thing because right around the time that you came out was about the time that I was sort of, formulating the idea for the podcast and sort of working out, trying to get into activism. And when I saw that article, I was like, oh my God, this is like, I can see how the community reacts to something like this. And I was very, very surprised at how overwhelmingly positive the comments were on that blog post, because rule number one for me of being a trans person on the internet is you never read the comments.
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, it depends greatly on what site you're on. I mean, the never read the comments, that's something like Christian Post also covered my coming out. And, the comments on Christian Post are very, very different.
Right.
And, it's my job to read the comments and understand the kind of the pulse of what people are saying about American atheists and about this kind of stuff. And so I have to. But Friendly Atheist is atheist readers,
right.
Almost exclusively. I mean, sure, they have readers who aren't. But it's a blog. It's an inter-community blog for, by an atheist for an atheist audience, as opposed to Christian Post, which is a Christian news source for a Christian audience. So it's going to be a very different comment section there. I think there's this kind of idea that people say things on the internet that they wouldn't say in real life, and that's kind of true. It's not like these are different people. I mean, it's the same. It's not like things on the internet don't matter, or things on the internet are somehow not real. They're real, and these are real people saying them. And it's just anonymity creates this kind of freedom for people, or pseudo freedom for people, where they can say things that they're thinking that they wouldn't normally say out of politeness. And that kind of that goes both ways. People can talk about things they wouldn't normally talk about, and people can be very rude in ways that they would never normally be rude. And I think it just depends on the outlet. If on something like Facebook, where their name is tied to what they're saying, they're going to hold back a lot more than something like the comment section of a blog, where they can use whatever pseudonym they want. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and you spend a lot of time, having these conversations with, folks who aren't necessarily friendly to what American Atheists is doing, or what, atheism in general. And, I'm curious, how has it changed the way that you interact with them? Do they generally respect the new name and pronouns? Do they throw that by the wayside, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's basically two kinds of people that I work with. There's journalists and pundits. And journalists overwhelmingly, or even unanimously, I would say, use the right pronouns and name, and keep their opinion out of it, because they're journalists, and that's what they do.
Sure.
They don't editorialize, and they have style guides and policy guides, and they understand that regardless of their personal feelings about it, or regardless of their religious identity, if a source says this is their name, then that's the name that they use. And if the source says this is the pronouns that they use, then that's what they use. It's more a matter of accurate reporting than anything else. I also talk to a lot of podcasters and a lot of people whose job it is to inject their opinion or not inject, but rather voice their opinion, to broadcast their opinion. That's what they're being paid to do, and that's why people tune into them. And for those people, it's very different. They're going to say whatever they want, and if they're supportive of trans people, they'll make that clear, and if they're not, they'll make that clear. It's pretty much so far been exclusively on religious lines, and I don't want to say that there is no such thing as an atheist who's anti-LGBT or transphobic, because there are atheists like that. But so far in my professional life, the only people that I've dealt with who do not respect those pronouns are religious people, and I don't think that's an accident. I think that I think that there's this aspect of religion that's kind of inherent, that's kind of built in, that is anti-LGBT. At least we're talking about the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic, tradition, and that's why we tend to see that. But yeah, it's really a religious difference so far in how it's played out, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I've found largely the same thing. I actually gush about the atheist community a lot because I was sort of nervous, jumping in because, what I'm trying to do in the atheist community is bring these conversations to the forefront, not necessarily about, because you hear people talk about marriage equality all the time, and marriage equality is super important, but you don't often hear the conversation about trans issues and, violence and homelessness and poverty and access to healthcare and that kind of thing. And I've been very pleasantly surprised at how willing people are to have those conversations. Yeah,
I think marriage is kind of, for political and legal strategy reasons, marriage was the focus and is the focus for equality for LGBT people, or LGBT people, I guess. But I never want to get married. It's not something that I have a goal of for myself, and it's not something that I want. And it's never been something that it's something I care about other people having the right to do, but it's not like a motivating drive for me that that this is something I'm going to fight for personally. There are so many other things that I would rather see happen on a personal level, not on a societal level. If I could make a major change in how politics works, and as far as how LGBT people are given equal rights or their rights are recognized, I should say, in American law, and marriage is important in as far as a big picture type of thing, as far as changing people's minds about LGBT people deserving equal rights. But as far as my day-to-day life, I would much rather be able to use the right bathroom when I'm out in public. Like, that's frankly much more important to me.
Yeah, me too.
Just in affirming my identity and so on. And it would be an easier thing to fix, I think, because it's not like there's any kind of tax difference that would have to happen for that to happen. It's not like there's any kind of major paperwork type of change. All that they would have to do is just say, hey, anybody can use any bathroom and you're not allowed to say anything. It's like that. They wouldn't have to change anything, maybe some signage, but that's about it. And it's like, I don't know. It's not the most important issue to me. It is very important to me. It's one that I have fought for, and I've given money and so on, and attended rallies and things like that. But as far as my personal life, I understand why politically and strategically it's a focus, but it's not the only issue.
Yeah, and speaking of personally, if we can go there, what did that process, like, was there a tipping point where you sort of just came to the realization, like, this has to happen now? Or was it a more gradual thing, and then one day you just kind of realized, like, oh wow, this is something that I need to do? Like, how did that work for you?
Well, I've known more or less a long time, more than 20 years. It was, looking back, there were a lot of things that should have clued me in sooner. I think that if I had been raised in a different environment, I'm from mid-Missouri, and if I had been raised in Portland, I think that my life would have gone very differently. Mm-hmm. I didn't have access to good information about this, and also this is the fact that I'm 31, which is different than somebody who's now 12 or something. The amount of information available, the quality of information available, and the accessibility of the average person, to that info is very different than it was when I was a kid. Wikipedia did not exist back then. I didn't even have. You couldn't get on the internet on your phone. You couldn't just look stuff up like that. That's not how it worked. If you wanted information, I had the Encyclopedia Britannica. Like, seriously, that's how I did it. And if you wanted info like this, there was no way to realistically find it unless you already knew what you were looking for and you knew exactly where to go for it. And I think that I would have come out a lot sooner if I had been told, hey, there's this thing called transgender, right, and here's what it is. And another thing that really held me back is incorrect information about it, not just lack of information. I thought that I wasn't trans because I'm not attracted to men. And I thought, I understand what a transgender person is, but I can't, that can't be me because I like women. And it never, it's not that it never occurred to me as much as just that I never knew that sexuality and gender are separate things because it wasn't explained to me. I never learned about that. And it really wasn't until 2 years ago, was it 2 or 3 now? I can't even remember. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference at the Secular Student Alliance in Columbus, Ohio, and my friend Caleb gave a talk about transgender stuff and mentioned that just in the Q&A offhand. I mean, it wasn't even part of the presentation, that sexual orientation and gender identity are separate things and you can be gay and trans. And I was like, holy shit, I'm trans.
Right.
Yeah, so I was like, oh yeah, lesbians are a thing. I guess that's true. So that's really when I was like, okay, so now I know exactly what's going on, and I have a name for it, and I know what I am. And so I'd been having a lot of personal issues that, we can get into it if you want, but in trying to wrestle with this for years and years. And basically what prompted me coming out was turning 30 and realizing that I don't have to live as something that I'm not, and for my whole life. I don't have to do that. I have options. I have a career that is going to be supportive. When I used to work, you mentioned in the intro that I used to work as a praise musician, and when I was doing praise and worship music for my career, it's a little harder to do that. But now that I'm working in a job where I can come out and not lose my job, and not just not lose my job, but actually have support, and now that I have health insurance, and now that I live on the East Coast where it's a little, people are more understanding about this sort of thing. I have friends who are out and who can help me with this. I have friends who have transitioned who can help me with this. It's just a very different outlook versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago for where I was in my life. And that might have been different if I lived somewhere else and I were born in a different year than I was born, but that's the way it is. And I knew that continuing to live inauthentically, I think is the best word, was not really an option it's not just that I turned 30 and I was like, I need to come out because this is the right thing to do. It's more like not coming out is the wrong thing to do, and that's not true for everybody. And I would never ever fault somebody for choosing not to, or coming to a conclusion that it's not something that they're able to do safely or whatever. It is for me. It was for me, and it's been difficult. And there have been times that I've really regretted it. But overall, I'm happier now that people are calling me by the name that I want and the pronouns that I want, which are the only two real major changes that I've gone through so far.
You have so much fun ahead. I've been on hormones for just over a year now, and oh man, that gets fun. So yeah, I think people underestimate the importance of having a supportive workplace. I actually lost a job over being trans, and I ended up landing in a place that was better, and I'm happier now, professionally than I've ever been. But right. I didn't know that was going to happen at the time, right. So that was a real struggle for me. I think people seriously underestimate how important that is.
Well, you have. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're okay. You're okay.
You have to. It's your livelihood. You can't. Not that you can't, because people do, but it is so much more difficult, I can imagine, to not have a supportive workplace and have income and have insurance and so on, and try to do this. Like, I can't even think of how I would go about doing this without a supportive workplace. That's just been such a key part of this. Before I even came out publicly, they were super supportive and still are, but they were before I came out, and encouraging and helpful with resources and helpful with time off for appointments and just anything I needed. They're here for me, and it's because this is important to them, and they it's not just that we're friends, we are too, but they understand that this is what I need, and it's a medical issue, and it's no different than, if I had any other medical issue, diabetes or something, and I needed to go to appointments for that. That's how they see it, and not everybody sees it that way, and I think that's changing. I think that it's they said last year was the tipping point for trans issues, and I think that's pretty true with Laverne Cox on the cover of Time, and with Orange is the New Black, and all these things going on where it's becoming accepted in pop culture, and that's informing a lot of people's opinions about it. I think we're into the point now where a large chunk of the population, if not the majority, I don't have statistics in front of me, but a lot of people now consider it socially unacceptable to be anti-trans or to be transphobic, and that wasn't true 10 years ago. And I think this is an important difference, and especially not just not being transphobic or not, or being anti-trans, but seeing it as a medical condition that is treatable with medical care is a major mental shift from where we used to be several years ago about seeing it as a sickness, or seeing it as something wrong with you. And there is something wrong, but you can fix it.
Right, exactly.
I'm not trying to say there's something wrong with you, but saying that there's something bad about it. There's a difference between something that's wrong and bad, and something that's wrong and fixable and it's just not the way you want it. A high blood pressure is something wrong with you, but it's not like there's something wrong with you because
right.
you have high blood pressure.
It's a distinction between the moral connotation and the fact that there's just something that needs corrected.
Right, exactly. And this mental shift that people are going through, and this, we saw exactly the same thing with homosexuality several decades ago. That it's not that this is not a mental disorder. This is not something that is a psychiatric condition, or and I think because of the medical treatment of aspect of being trans, as far as actually transitioning, it's never really going to quite leave the realm of being a medical condition, and that's understandable. But like being gay, nobody sees that as something to treat anymore, and that's good.
Right.
But trans is different. I mean, that's always going to be something you have the option of treating because that's how it works. But people don't see that as a negative thing or as something wrong with you the way that they used to, and that the same way that they used to with being gay.
Yeah, I think, and obviously there's issues with dysphoria and body issues that, trans people feel to, sometimes mildly, sometimes severely. And obviously that's always going to be an issue. But I think, there's this concept that I became recently aware of. It's something that I describe all the time and had no idea that it's a concept that's actually been studied, and it's called minority stress. And basically it describes this constant low-level stress that people who belong to minority groups face. And that's largely an explanation for why you see higher instances of mental illness, of depression and anxiety and all that sort of stuff among minority groups. It's not because, there's something inherently wrong with these people and who they are. It's the fact that they're not the default human being for society.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I hadn't heard of that, but sure. I mean, there's a lot of privilege that goes along with not being a minority in any situation, and when you have privilege, it's basically like less of a load that you're carrying, and I can completely understand how that would cause fewer, ill side effects for a person just going about their day-to-day life.
And you said you talked earlier about personal issues that you were dealing with. I mean, can you describe some of that? Was it the things that you always hear about that trans people go through, or was it more of a unique experience? Like how did that work for you?
And I mean, everybody's experience is different from everyone else's. It's too personal of a thing to generalize about. But yeah, I mean, I can talk about my experience, and especially if it would help other people, I don't mind doing that. So, fortunately, like I was saying before, I had a workplace that was very understanding and helpful, and not just understanding and helpful, but actively involved in making sure that I have what I need to stay here and to do well here, which was necessary for me. Dysphoria and body dysmorphia were both, and still are, both major problems for me. And I'm seeing a therapist now, and it's helping a lot. But there was a time that I couldn't shower because I couldn't deal with that level of I guess intimacy, for lack of a better word, with my body. And as somebody whose job it is to appear in the media, that's
right.
kind of necessary, and work in an office and so on. And I just, there were times where I'll just give you an example. Like we had an event, this was at the launch of Atheist TV, July 29th last summer. And so I had grown out my nails because I liked them better that way, and it made me feel more feminine, and it was something minor that I could do without it being a big deal, because this was before I came out. Mm-hmm. And I was going to this event. I had to dress up and have my picture taken and stuff, and I knew that I couldn't have my nails long there, so I went to the bathroom to cut my nails, and I could not stop crying, and it was a mess. I was like, I need to change. I need to get to New York City. I can't be dealing with this right now. And it was just awful over something as silly. It's not silly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Over just forcing my, oh man, sorry. I'm just remembering what that was like. Over trying to force myself to fit into a a mold of something that wasn't really me, and presenting myself formally to other people as something that isn't me, and trying to conform like that. And it was very, very hard. And I remember thinking, like, what if the next time I have to do this, I can't stop crying and get my shit together and get dressed and go do it? Am I going to lose my job? I can't keep doing this where only part of the time at work, when I'm around my friends, can I be who I really am? And things like that. There were many instances like that, but those sorts of events taken all together made me realize that I can't stay in the closet. This is not something that I am able to pull off. There are some people who are able to do it, and I'm not calling them inauthentic, but that's not something that I could do. I couldn't actually carry it out. And I had the same issue when I was an atheist in the closet. Mm-hmm. It's being honest and open and assertive about what I think is true is extremely important to me. And it's a major part of my job, and it's a major part of the reason that Dave Silverman hired me, is that I can't shut up about things that I think.
Right.
And yeah, it was a similar thing when I was, because I was an atheist for a whole year, the last year that I was playing worship music, and it was very difficult. And it was, I don't want to say harder, but it was a different situation. But I knew that I would lose my job as soon as I came out as an atheist, and that's exactly what happened. I knew I would lose a lot of friends, and that's exactly what happened. But I had to. I couldn't pretend to be religious. I couldn't go on a stage and be part of an act that was actively converting people to Christianity and reinforcing belief in Christianity, and be able to sleep at night. I couldn't do it. And I had to leave that environment and come out. And part of the reason that I get up in the morning now and go to work and do what I do is, I don't want to say out of guilt or something, but it's kind of to make up for, on some level, the type of damage that I did to people, converting them to Christianity. I've converted a lot of people to Christianity in my life, and it's something that I'm very regretful about. And it informs my actions now. And in the same way that there have been times, it's not that I was transphobic, but times that I added to the public perception that being trans isn't normal by living inauthentically before. It's now important to me, even though it's not my main area of expertise or activism, it's important to me to do what I can to help other trans people understand there's nothing wrong with them, and that correct information about trans stuff is available if you want it, and coming out can be liberating.
That's awesome. So, as we kind of wrap up here, basically the episode is about coming out, and the topic of coming out, whether that's shedding a religious identity or coming out as LGBT. Mm-hmm. Those things are hard, because I think a lot of people forget that a lot of times, your religion can be as much a part of your identity as your sexuality or your gender.
Sure. Yep.
So, I know that there are listeners to my show who are closeted about being atheist or about being LGBT. So if you could say anything to those folks, what would you say?
Really simply that being authentic is very valuable, and it's not the most valuable thing. It's more important to have a roof over your head, to have food to eat, to have those types of things. And if you have to choose being authentic or having a roof over your head, I would not tell you to choose being authentic. But being authentic is very freeing, and it makes you feel better. It makes you feel whole in a way that is very difficult to describe and difficult to explain, but it's so worth it. And I think if there's a way that you can be authentic, whether we're talking about coming out as an atheist or talking about coming out as gay or coming out as trans, that it's important to do that. I value authenticity. It makes my life much more honest, and honesty is very important to me. And I think that kind of goes back to what I do for a living. I care about communication because that's what I do.
Right.
But you have to be honest with yourself first, and that can take years, and that's okay. It took me a really long time. I didn't really label myself as trans until, like I said, I was 28, 29. And if it takes that long, that's fine. If it takes longer, that's fine. If it doesn't take that long, that's fine too. But I would encourage you to find resources and make the decision to come out to the greatest degree that you can and that you're comfortable. There's a great book by Greta Christina called Coming Out Atheist, How to Do It, How to Help Each Other, and Why. It's specifically about atheism, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there that could just as equally apply to coming out as gay or coming out as trans. Of course, the resources are not applicable, but there are a lot of good resources too. If you Google it, if you go to Reddit, there are some subreddits that have some good stuff about trans information. But there's a lot of info available. If you're a college student, most colleges these days also have LGBT centers with information available, that kind of stuff. I would not encourage you to go to your regular doctor about this right away, because most regular doctors have very little training in this kind of stuff and are not going to be able to give you good or up-to-date information unless they're a specialist in this area. But yeah, LGBT centers on college campuses, the internet, and trans specialist doctors and psychologists and social workers and so on have great resources available.
Awesome. Well, look, I know you are an extremely busy person, and I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to talk about this stuff. I think it's super important, and I've generally found, as you have the atheist movement, a very good place to be as a trans person. So I'm glad to hear that experience is echoed. So again, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate your time, and hopefully our paths will cross at a convention or something sometime soon.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We'll be right back for the Gaytheist discussion on coming out.
We are given one life, full of billions of small and large decisions. To be somebody, to change, to be kind, to give hope, to become a better person, and to leave a lasting impact on this planet. It is a decision to be made every single day while your heart is still beating. We've made our decision. Absence of Clothing, atheist and science-based apparel and merchandise, donating 50% of our profits to charity. Look good and feel good, without God. Check us out at absenceofclothing.com and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today's discussion is, of course, on coming out. As I said in the intro, I think coming out of a closet is a universal experience. Obviously, everyone's experience is a little different, but what a closet really is a hard conversation. Coming out as trans was super scary for me, but telling your loved ones you have a terminal illness is super scary too. Telling your spouse you need to file for bankruptcy is scary. So while each of our experiences are unique, we need to remember to honor the fact that we all have these experiences and that they're universally difficult. As I've said before on the show, coming out as atheist wasn't exactly a struggle for me. My religious influence growing up was pretty minimal, though I did consider myself a Christian at one time. On the other hand, coming out as trans may have been the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. It was scary for me even having near complete confidence that my friends and family would be okay with it. So I'd like to have a talk now about the ways that Jonathan, Daniel, and I have come out of our respective closets and offer some perspective on those experiences. Daniel, how did you end up coming out to your family?
Well, I like the way you say that a closet is really just a hard conversation, because that is exactly what it is. I grew up in a Christian household, and I started coming to terms with the fact that I was gay sometime in my late teens. I was able to repress it for a good number of years up to that point. And because I was so involved in the church and Christianity was such a big part of my life, being gay was just unacceptable. And I ended up leaving the church around the age of 19, and it wasn't until I was about 24 that I came out to my parents. And I did it because I just wanted them to know the truth of who I was, and I was no longer scared of how they would react to it. That's not really true. I was scared of how they would react to it, but I had decided that I no longer wanted to let that fear rule my life. So I did tell them. It wasn't a pleasant conversation. My mom cried. There was a lot of talk about me getting AIDS, and it wasn't natural, and a lot of the things that Christian folks would expect to hear from their parents, or at least from Christian parents. And so that was difficult. They never really have come to terms with it, and it's been about 13 years since then, because I'm 37 now. So they never did come to terms with it. My brother I told actually a few years earlier, when I was about 21, and he seemed to accept it just fine. And to this day, both my brother and my sister-in-law are completely accepting of me. They let me talk about this aspect of my life, and that's really awesome. I cannot talk about this aspect of my life with my parents, which sucks. Coming out atheist was a bit of a different story for me, because my parents knew that I had left the church, and they knew that my faith had pretty much unraveled. It just wasn't something that we talked a lot about. My mom told me a lot that, she was praying for me to come back, and that I would find Jesus again and get back into the Christian groove. But I just, for me, I've compared it to when you're a kid and you learn that Santa Claus isn't true. Mm-hmm. You can never go back to believing in Santa Claus after that.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. So I tried telling my mom that, that this isn't just a wayward phase in my life. It was an awakening for me, a very hard one. And that I would never be able to, quote, believe in Santa Claus again. So, I think for my parents, my mom in particular, it was sort of a double whammy, because it's like, I'm gay, and oh great, of course I have to be an atheist too.
Right.
And that was, that's been a really tough spot for me in my relationship with my parents, and like I said, my mom in particular, because I really want to be close to my mom and have a tight relationship with her, but she's made that impossible, because either me being gay or me being an atheist somehow comes up, whether it's her deciding to just make really ugly comments about gay people or things like that I'm no longer silent about those things, and I call her out on it, and I say, you shouldn't say things like that about gay people. It's hurtful, and she doesn't care. So she's made the decision and how close we're allowed to get. So I'm trying. That's a road I'm still trying to navigate. It still hurts, and it's still a tender spot for me. But I can't force her to accept me. Yeah. So, as far as my brother and sister-in-law are concerned with the atheism, it's just they sort of figured it out. I don't know if I ever came out per se. It was always something that just came up more and more in my conversations with them. That it was pretty clear that I no longer not only didn't believe in God, but over the years became actually an outspoken advocate against religion, and they figured that out. They still love and accept me, even though they identify as Christians. That's another thing that I can talk about with them. They can entertain my atheism just as well as I can entertain their Christianity. Mm-hmm. So it's an equally beneficial relationship there.
That's awesome. I think one thing that we often forget as atheists, even people who are previously religious, people who are previously super religious. I think a lot of times we forget that religion is as much a part of a person's identity as, for example, my gender identity is, or, your sexuality is. Those things are not, because, we often say like, well, I can separate the belief from the person, and I can criticize religion, but not criticize you personally. And, philosophically, that's true. You can criticize someone's belief without criticizing them personally, but that's who they are. Their faith is their identity. And I think that's something that we'd probably do well to remember in these conversations sometimes, as much as we want them to recognize that about us, because they would obviously say the same thing. Well, it's not you that I have a problem with. It's your quote unquote lifestyle.
Love the sinner, not the sin.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of us, especially those of us who consider ourselves rational atheists, it's a lot easier for us to see things in rational terms sometimes than we expect them to be for religious people. A lot of, like you were saying, a lot of religious people identify so strongly with their religion, and I was there at one time. I know exactly what it's like. They identify so strongly with their religion that it's indistinguishable from who they are, and you can't just. We as atheists, we can't just plow through and say, well, your beliefs are ridiculous, or even we have to be very careful of how we approach that. If our intention is to have a connection with a person rather than just to have a gotcha moment with a Christian, which the latter I don't think is a good idea ever. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to kind of set your priorities. It's the whole discussion of, well, I'm a humanist first. I mean, I'm definitely an atheist, and I want to have these conversations about religion because I think it's important, but it's more important to me what your philosophy is about how you actually treat people. Because I have Christian people in my life who I'm super close with, who I love to death, and we never talk about religion because it never comes up. They love me as a human being. I love them as a human being, and that's all that matters. And that's, in an ideal world, that's what it should be. Of course, it oftentimes doesn't work out that way.
I love you as a human being.
Oh, well, thank you. And I love both of you as human beings.
I love nobody.
I'm telling you,
my godless heart cannot love.
That's so sad.
No, I love you guys too.
Aww.
So, Jonathan, talk to me about coming out for you. How did that look?
Well, for me, honestly, coming out as gay was a lot easier than coming out as atheist, because I think most religious people think that, if you're gay, well, you're still redeemable, but, not believing is the unpardonable sin.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I came out as gay to my parents in my early 20s some point. I know I came out basically in my early 20s. It was always, I kind of had an inkling there, but it took me a while to put all the pieces together. My parents are in what I would consider a fringe religious Christian. They don't consider themselves Christian because they believe they're kind of somewhere between Christianity and Judaism, I guess. They believe in the Messiah, but they celebrate the Jewish holidays. They're not Jews.
Is there
Messianic Jews? Is it Messianic Jew?
They're not exactly Messianic Jews either. They're they don't really have a name for themselves, but what I've in my research, the name for it is called the Sacred Name Movement. They believe that using the term God is wrong. They use Yahweh, which Jews never would, because Jews feel that it's wrong to do that. But they do the Sabbath instead of Sunday. That is when they worship. They're not really organized. There's not like a church. They just meet at people's house for like a Bible study. I would say my stepdad is probably, at least in this area, one of the, I don't know, what you would consider like an elder. He's one of the they mostly meet at my parents' house and on Sabbath and on Saturday, and he they do a Bible study and things like that. Anyway, one thing though, since none of them grew up in that, and they all came to it on their own. And one thing my parents always instilled in me as a child was that you need to come to it on your own, that you need to look at things critically and decide for yourself. Well, I don't think they realized what that kind of teaching would do to my brain. I did exactly that. And, like I said, coming out of gay was pretty easy. I remember I was on the phone with my stepmom, and it was just a quick conversation, and not a lot was said about it. And my parents, while they're not happy with it, they still love me. And, and I guess they pray for me. But coming out as atheist, now that was a whole other complete story. I remember when I was living in Salt Lake, and I was having a hard time, and I was talking to my stepmom on the phone, and she asked me, well, have you prayed about it? And I said no. And she said, why not? And I said, you're probably not going to like the answer to that question. And so I told her, and she didn't like it, and but like I said, they're the ones that taught me to think critically. So sorry if that took me to a place that they didn't like.
Right.
So and that's pretty much the story. We don't talk about it. I have a friend from high school who is actually the son of my dad's best friend, and he comes over for dinner on Sundays quite a bit, and he's also my friend is also an atheist, and his dad's not. And I remember just recently one day my dad's friend, who's the father, just in the middle of dinner, he's like, so I understand you're an atheist, right? Just about spit out my roast. Like, yeah. This
great conversation starter.
Yeah, just what I want to hear. And then I guess he was upset because his son is an outspoken atheist on Facebook, and apparently pissed off some people here that are friends with his dad because of his outspokenness, and he's straight, but still he's a really cool guy and an ally of gay people. So, but yeah, so he wanted to hear my perspective on it, and I was just like, well, I'll tell you what I can.
Right. So, Jonathan, you mentioned that you came out over the phone, and it wasn't a super big deal. Daniel, when you decided to come out, what was it? A phone conversation? Was it a face-to-face talk? How did that look?
It was both times with both my parents and my brother. It was a face-to-face talk. I was at my parents' house with them when I was 24 and had that talk with them. And my brother and I, when I was 21, we were sitting out on the patio of a friend's house. We had just taken some ecstasy, and that conversation went really easily because of that.
Right.
And but
yeah. Coming out for me was, well, and obviously coming out as trans is a little different. I don't want to put it on a hierarchy like it's, any less or more hard, but it's certainly a different experience. I
think it is hard for trans people to come out. There's more stigma against being
There is, but still, if it's, if I'm laying the hardest thing you've ever done up against the hardest thing I've ever done, you know what I mean? It's not necessarily a fair comparison. Cause then I think about like, well, what about, well, I just found out I have stage 4 cancer and I have to go home and tell my kids that I have 3 months to live. You know what I mean? Like that's probably the hardest thing they've ever done. I would, in my head, I'm thinking that's probably way harder than, like, saying that would probably be way harder for me than coming out as trans, but I don't necessarily have the state of mind to understand exactly where that person would be. Right. So, you know what I mean? So it's still, it's just hard. And it's not, I don't know that it's useful to, like, well, coming out as trans is so much harder as coming out than gay. You know what I mean? Like, it's certainly different. But so Well, and actually, let me ask you guys before I start talking about my story. Daniel, I'll start with you. Was there a tipping point where something kind of snapped and you were like, look, this is something I have to do, as far as coming out?
Yeah, I had begun dating, and it was, you become excited about, when there's someone special in your life, and you want to tell your family, and you want them to be happy for you. And I guess I was somewhat hoping that's how it would go with my parents, that it's like, we will have the hard conversation now and get it over with, and then they'll become accepting, and I can bring this part of my life into the family. That's not how it worked out exactly, but yeah, that's what catalyzed.
And what about you, Jonathan?
Well, that's a whole nother story. So at the time, because when I came out as gay, I was still trying to be religious. I was actually going to a Messianic Jewish congregation when I lived in Boise, Idaho. And at the time, I was helping out, kind of like there was a member in the congregation who had just gotten over breast cancer, and her husband worked a lot, and they had a son who was right around 12, and I was trying to be a friend, like a big brother to him, be friends with him and go do things because his parents were busy, and he had 3 siblings, and we'd just hang out, and he was kind of nerdy like me, and it's cool, and then I realized I just felt like I needed to come out, and I came out in confidence with someone in the congregation, made her promise that she wouldn't tell anybody. Well, that didn't work, and she did, and everything just fell apart. And I was accused of being like a child molester, even though I'm like, how does that work?
Right.
And so finally I needed to tell my stepmom what was going on, and because I needed to talk to somebody, because that was like my entire world at the time. So
yes, like I've said before, I struggled with being trans to various degrees, since I first had, my sort of realization when I was like 10 or 11 or however old that was. And I was always really able to distract myself with other things that I had going on in life. And, basically I just got to a place where that wasn't working anymore. And I had to, like, this is something that I have to confront and something that I have to deal with. So, I started having those hard conversations one by one. I told a good friend of mine who offered to do whatever she could to support me. And, we ended up going clothes shopping, and she did a makeover and everything. And, and I looked in the mirror that day and I realized, like, wow, this is it. This is the real thing. This is not, it's not just some compulsion that I have. It's not something that I'm fantasizing about. Like, this is the real thing. And then it was just kind of like, oh my God, like, this is real. And, how is this going to affect my life? And I started identifying, like, well, who am I going to tell first? And I sort of went down the list of people that I was like 100% sure would be supportive no matter what. And, I started with my 2 best friends, my brother, my sister, some other close friends of mine. And, you just kind of widen the circle a little. And eventually I came out more publicly on Facebook. I actually wrote a letter to, and I kind of modeled it after a letter that I found on Facebook, and the author's name escapes me now, but basically just laying out what it means, what, my new name, why I picked it, all that sort of stuff. And I'd come out to my mom, I think about a week or so before. And the interesting thing about the conversation with my mom, and my grandma both, actually, was that neither of them knew what transgender meant. They both thought that I was coming out to them as bi. So, yeah. So, I said to my mom, like, well, I'm transgender. And she said, and we talked for a few seconds, and And she was like, well, are you telling me now because you're involved with someone that you want me to meet, or, what's going on? And I was like, not sure you know what this means. Like, do you understand what I'm telling you? And she said, well, I guess not. Why don't you start from the beginning? And it was kind of the same conversation with my grandma, actually. And my mom's been awesome. I feel like she's on a journey of her own with it, and she struggles with it. And, I don't hold that against her. But I mean, she uses the right name. She uses the right pronouns. She's very supportive. Sort of ambiguous on my grandma at this point.
That's awesome. I have an aunt who's trans, and my dad, her brother still insists on calling her Jeff. So,
God, that's the worst.
Yeah.
Especially when people do it deliberately.
Yeah.
That's just, it feels like it's just an attack when they do, doing it that way. I like when you said earlier that when you were talking about how when your friend was helping you and everything just sort of clicked, there was that light bulb moment. Mm-hmm. I think every gay and trans person can identify with that light bulb moment because there's a lot of straight folks have asked, how did you know you were gay, or how did you know you're, in your case, Callie, how did you know you were trans? And the question usually the way we answer that is, well, the same way you know that you're straight or cisgender, you just know. And
right.
And that's true to a point. There's all the factor that's missing there is that we're all assumed from the time we're kids, we're all assumed to be straight and cisgender. So we're sort of working against that tide as gay and transgender people. We're working against that tide our entire lives, most of us. And hopefully that's changing. But so when we do begin confronting our sexuality or our gender, it can be it's not just as easy as, oh, I'm gay or I'm trans. Sometimes it's really hard. Mm-hmm. You're holding like two ideas simultaneously and you're not sure which one's which. But I had that light bulb moment, the first time I had a sexual experience with a man. It was literally like a light bulb went off. And I said, okay, now sex makes sense. It didn't make sense before with women, but now I get it. Now I understand. And
right.
And so I think a lot of gay and trans folks can identify with that.
Yeah, it's like putting a puzzle together. And for me, it wasn't like a light bulb coming on like instantly. It was more like a dimmer switch gradually being turned up. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
I mean, was it more of a oh wow, there's that boy, and I think he's kind of cute, and like just kind of gradually working up from there? How did that work?
Well, I think just like I mean once. Before I hit puberty, I didn't have any feelings one way or the other.
Sure.
I mean, I know some people do that, like they know since they're 6. But for me, it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 when puberty started. And I remember there was this boy, really hot boy, that sat in front of me in math class in 7th grade, and he liked to wear like tank tops and muscle shirts all the time, and he had really nice arms and yeah and that was the first little inkling, and then it just went from there, until in my early 20s I tried dating a girl for a while, and that really didn't work out very well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how certain people value different things as far as coming out. Like when we're talking about coming out as gay or trans or bi or any flavor of queer or trans versus coming out as atheist. A conversation that I had with one of my best friends the night that I came out to him, we were talking, and I'd mentioned that my grandma was someone that I was really worried about as far as what her reaction was going to be. And he looked at me and he was like, but you're an atheist. Like, what could possibly be worse? And that logic made sense to me, right? Because for a fundamentalist Christian, I don't understand how anything could be worse than being an atheist, because if you believe, you can at least be saved, right?
Yeah, even if you don't believe in Christianity, that's better than not believing in anything.
Right, exactly, because faith is a virtue regardless.
For reasons that no religious person can explain.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I like the definition of faith in that book that you recommended, the Manual for Creating Atheists.
Believing things without evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I someone was trying to preach to me, and I tried to explain to them that, and they're like, "Well, I have evidence it's right here in my Bible."
Right. Exactly. But yeah, and it turned out to be the opposite. I mean, I've been a rather outspoken atheist since I was a teenager, and that never caused more than a debate or like an annoying conversation. But coming out as trans has actually really strained our relationship, and it's not broken, thankfully. I mean, I used to be my grandma's favorite, and it really sucks that that's not the case anymore, and that our relationship strained because of it. Yeah. But I definitely have hope. She buys me clothes occasionally, and she gave me nail polish the other day. So like,
yay! She buys you girls' clothes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah,
like unisex T-shirts.
Yeah, I worry sometimes that she thinks that's what it's really about, and she doesn't realize that it's actually an identity thing. It's not just about dressing different or presenting differently. I mean, even though that's part of it.
Yeah, there are plenty of people who are very happily cis male that like to dress in women's clothing.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
this might just be the path that she's taking to get to that place where she fully gets it.
Right, exactly. And, I want to try and respect that journey again, because I love my grandma. She bought me my first guitar. She bought me my first guitar amp. You know what I mean? Like, I was at her house every weekend as a kid, watching movies, and, it was kind of like the storybook grandma relationship.
She sounds like a cool grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, yeah.
Maybe it sounds like she just needs some time, and it sounds like she's gradually kind of getting it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to let people take some time. I think some people make this mistake of expecting people to get it right away. If they don't get it right away...
Yeah, something that I tell people a lot is like, so if you're coming out, speaking of, being gay or being trans, this is something that generally by the time you come, if we end up coming out as adults or teenagers, it's something that we've had a long, long time to internalize.
Exactly.
And this is not new to us. And, for me, knowing I was trans since I was like 10 or 11, I came out at 28. I came out and I was just ready to freaking go. You know what I mean? Because to me, this was not a new concept. This was something that I had researched to death. I knew all the literature. I had all the arguments ready, and I was ready to be like, okay, this is happening. Cool. This is happening like in an hour. And people need time to adjust. And I don't think it's unreasonable to allow that for people to adjust, especially when it's, a radical change, like you're asking someone to use a different name and different pronouns.
I want to throw in that when it came to my friends accepting me, because like what you were saying, Callie, it took me years to be okay with being gay, many years. And to the credit of my friends, every single one of my friends I came out to around the age of 21 was either fully accepting, surprised and fully accepting, or they were fully accepting and like, yeah, I've known that for a long time. I just assumed that you knew too. And I think a lot of gay folks, when they come out, they find that they're not the first to realize that they're gay.
Right.
But even some of it, and even to this day, I have a couple of Christian friends who they don't let their faith get in the way of a friendship between us, and they don't treat me, with disrespect or with godly, righteous contempt because of that. They treat me like a person.
Which is how it should be. Yeah,
that's how it should be.
Absolutely.
I think the best experience I ever had when I coming out as gay was I told a friend, and it was going to be this big dramatic moment. Oh, I'm gay, and their reaction was, "And that affects my day how?"
There you go. Because, in an ideal world, telling someone you're gay or trans should be like, hey, you know what? Like, I've had black hair my entire life. I think I'm going blonde. You know what I mean? Like, like it should be exactly that big of a deal. Like, oh, hey, that's different. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now, now I know how to talk to you about certain things. Like, just that should be the only change. It's like, okay, then I'll start asking you what you think of that guy instead of that girl. Like,
Right. Exactly. Okay. So something that I asked Danielle and Lydia both, and I would also love to get your guys' perspective on. At the end, I basically said, I know there are people who listen to this show who are in the closet. Because they've reached out to me and to the show. Whether that's, they can't tell their parents that they're atheists, or, they're afraid of, finding out, someone finding out that they're gay or that they're trans. So Jonathan, I'll start with you. If you had if you could send a message to people who are in the closet, what would you say?
I would say, come out when you're ready. Don't feel like you have to right away, especially if you're not in a situation where it's safe to have those conversations. If you live with parents who are religious and would kick you out or something like that, don't feel like you have to come out right away. Just do it when you're ready, when you're stable, when you're situated, and yeah.
Daniel?
Speaking as a gay cisgender man, I would suggest that you find your people. And when I say your people, I mean other gay people, if you're a gay person, or other trans people if you're a trans person. But speaking as a gay cisgender person, I didn't have a support network when I was accepting my sexuality and coming to terms with it in my late teens. I didn't know anyone who was going through that, so I went through it alone, and it made my process a lot harder than it could have been. If you're in the closet and you're struggling with that, we live in the age of the internet. You can find people now. Find those friends and find that support network, and find your people, and let their friendship guide you as far as not eventually coming out of the closet, because that's the goal. But also to come to terms with why you're not comfortable with it. What are the things that are keeping you in the closet? What are the fears, real or imagined? What are the worst case scenarios? You need to be able to talk about those things with people who have been there and who understand. So find them and embrace them, and hold on to them. One of the things that I really wish I'd had as a young gay man was gay mentors, who like gay big brothers or gay uncles, as we might call them. I really wish I'd had that, and I think that's well.
Easy.
That's a whole different side of it. But
okay.
Yeah, find your people, and nothing will be more rewarding than having that support network and that family when you're coming out and afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I just had a comment on what Daniel was saying, and finding the right people. I think is important, because I remember when I first came out into the gay world, I'm a bigger guy, hairy and happy chubby fellow, but the gay world can be kind of fierce, and not in a good RuPaul kind of way. It can be very difficult, and you can be criticized a lot on your looks. And I know I struggled with self-esteem issues, because when I came out, I was told by a lot of guys that I was ugly, and and all this kind of stuff. So make sure you find the right people who love you for you.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be yourself, and you have to find people who love you for what you're actually bringing to the table, not wanting to sit at the cool kids table necessarily, and shaping yourself to fit that label. And that's, Jonathan, that's another thing that I think is important, is you don't buy into what a lot of the stereotypes say you have to be, or even what a lot of communities and scenes say that you have to be. Just be yourself.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, we're all still human, and there are still problematic things that happen within these communities, and just be careful. Don't feel like you have to put yourself in a position where you're uncomfortable just because, like, wow, I'm gay and I really need a place to be around other gay people, but like, I hate these people and they don't treat me well. Like, don't feel like you have to put yourself in that situation. Just you can find people who will love you. Okay, and I'm going to reserve comment because basically my message to folks in the closet is going to be in the ally segment. So we will be right back with Be a Better Ally on Gaytheist Manifesto.
Grow your library and your vocabulary without ever looking up from your precious little smartphone. Visit atheistaudiobooks.com and start listening in minutes.
Here's an excerpt from Disproving Christianity by David G. McAfee.
Each argument and contradiction presented will bring us closer to disproving the main pillars of Christianity, using nothing more than logical thinking, statistics, scientific and historical data, and Holy Scriptures. The debates between Christians and non-Christians have raged for thousands of years, and I expect the conflict to continue. But I do hope that these arguments will allow those Christians who may not have questioned biblical fallibility in the past to realize that these texts are man-made, and they represent the ideas of those fallible individuals who created and edited the compilation of texts now considered to be the Holy Bible. They contain errors, contradictions, and a stagnant moral code which, in many ways, no longer coincides with the morality of modern man. What I hope to gain from presenting these arguments and little-known biblical passages to the reader is a sense of understanding of Scripture which may not be presented in Bible study or in church, and for good reason. If read with an open mind, I truly believe that this book will open people's eyes to the wonders of free thought in a way that other works utilizing a more philosophical approach cannot.
Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings by David G. McAfee is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
Welcome back to the show. On this week's Be a Better Ally, I want to discuss having compassion for those folks who feel unsafe or uncomfortable coming out, and how we can better serve those folks in our communities. I think it's important to say here that I think being out is important. I think if you can do so safely and comfortably, you should stand up and be open about who you are, because the movement does need you. But I would never suggest that someone should do so before they're ready or before they can safely do so. Coming to terms with an identity that doesn't fit within the mainstream culture's ideal can be a years or even decades-long process, and that's okay. Barging headlong into the spotlight without figuring out some basic things about how to navigate the world can be really dangerous. So I think instead of focusing on telling people why they should be coming out, we need to focus on two things. One, we need to make ourselves available as a resource to those who can't yet share who they are with their friends, loved ones, or their community. We need to honor and respect who they are and honor and respect their confidence. Second, we need to work to make the world a place where these people can finally feel comfortable sharing themselves with the world, and make sure they know unequivocally that when they're ready, they will be welcomed with open arms into our communities as family.
Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier. We all have closets to come out of. Every person in the world has some kind of closet that they're coming out of, and because everyone has that hard conversation to have with someone that they're putting off for various reasons. We can all be kind, and we can all be respectful and gentle with people who are wanting that person to come out to, or to talk about with, to sort of explore the edges that they're comfortable with. And I think that's a great thing to be when we can.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be careful about not pressuring people into coming out before they're ready. Because, especially, I can speak from my perspective, coming out as trans, the world is a scary place to be trans sometimes. And I would never ask someone to take that on before they thought they were ready for it. I can say on the other side of it, I am the happiest I've ever been. I'm glad I did it, and I wouldn't go back and change it. But that's also coming from the perspective of someone who had supportive friends, supportive family, and an awesome community to go to. And I know not everybody's that lucky. So, that's speaking from my experience and how awesome it's been for me. I know that's not everyone's experience, and I wouldn't want to tell someone like, oh yeah, it's going to be great. Just do this and totally screw your life up.
Right.
Yeah. And definitely on that same note, outing people is definitely not cool. If someone tells you in confidence, don't tell anyone else.
Yeah,
I've had that experience when I was first coming out, and it's
right.
Tough.
And I think a lot of people don't realize. I mean, that's literally a matter of personal safety. Like, you can put someone in physical danger by outing them,
or financial danger. You can endanger their jobs, their families, their living situation.
Unless they're an asshole politician. Oh, I can't say that word, can I?
No, asshole is fine.
Oh, okay. Unless they're an asshole politician or preacher or something that's anti-gay, then I kind of have no problem with outing them.
Yeah, I think I'm good with that.
Yeah, public figures who are actively working against our movement, who are just closeted themselves. No, that doesn't work for me.
Yep.
But, yeah.
So, quick edit here. I had posted on Facebook asking people to contribute their coming out stories, and I got one slightly after we recorded the episode, but I wanted to make sure it got included. This is from Sandy. She says, I'm a bisexual woman, and although I've come out to a few people in the past, I have learned to keep my sexuality hidden for the most part. When I came out atheist, I spent a lot of time educating my friends about my disbelief, and I'm just not sure I'm ready to do that with my sexuality. Like atheism, bisexuality is widely misunderstood and often disrespected. When a person comes out as gay, everyone knows what that means. But when I say I'm bisexual, people think it means I'm confused or that I just haven't realized I'm actually gay. Then there are those who think that bisexual means that I'm currently having sex with multiple partners of both genders, as if there's something wrong with that. They think I value sex over relationships, or that regardless of my relationship status, I'm open to anything sexual with anybody. I don't know where all these misconceptions come from, but I've heard it all, and it's a major reason why I keep it to myself. Being bisexual doesn't make me an object. It is not an invitation to disrespect me as a person or make inappropriate comments to me or about me, and it certainly does not mean that I want to F everyone I meet. In fact, I am happily committed in a hetero relationship. The best way to be an ally is to listen to one another, educate ourselves, and work together to change these misconceptions. Speak out when someone makes an insensitive joke or gives an ill-informed opinion. When you see a misconception being spread, say something. Educate yourself and your friends about legislation that affects the LGBT community. Encourage them to get involved and to vote better. I am an ally, and I may not be entirely out about my bisexuality, but I speak up when I have the opportunity, and I'm very active in educating my community. To me, being an ally is more than just being a friend. It's about action. When we spread positive messages, we create more allies, and more allies means more educated voters and an overall more friendly environment for all LGBT individuals, an environment where I can be myself. Thanks, Sandy. I had a friend of mine send me a message, and she's a closeted trans person. Her name's Renata, and I reached out to her and I said, hey, I know that you're not you're not out to more than a few people, and what do you want to hear? What's your story? And here's what she sent. I am mostly closeted. I have a few people that trust that I know. I in general feel sometimes there's a little bit of pressure to come out, but for me that would mean instant loss of a large chunk of my income. I worry that I'm seen as being a coward and disingenuous to the community by not living out and open. I sometimes feel like support I get from some people is contingent on moving toward that end goal of coming out. There's a difference between worrying you may lose a job and knowing my situation will change eventually, but right now this is the place I am at in my life. And I want to say, because I know Renata's a listener to the show, she told me she is, you're not a coward.
You're not.
Mm-mm.
You are so not a coward, and you are so not disingenuous. you are taking care of yourself. And, that's an awful position to be in. And basically you have to choose between bad and worse, and you're choosing to avoid worse. And there's no shame in that. And, I would love for the world to be such that you could come out if that's something that you wanted to do. I think I can speak for Jonathan and Daniel both when we say that's what we're working on. And, you're a member of this community, whether you're out or not, and we care about you. And, so I think that's, I think that's pretty representative of people who feel like they can't come out, even people who can't come out as atheists. Because there are some places in the country where you can lose your job if you find out, because everybody you work with is at the same church, or the boss is your preacher, or, things like that. I think that's super important to remember.
Or not even this country. I mean, I don't know if we have any international listeners, but there are places in the world where both being gay and not believing in God will get you killed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in Bangladesh, there was a secular blogger who was literally hacked to death on a busy street in the middle of the day for being atheist. And that's, I think, the 5th one or so in that part of the world in the past year.
Yeah. And Renata, not only are you not a coward, but I think a lot of people underestimate how much will and how much energy it actually takes to get to the point where you accept being gay or bi or transgender, because we live in a culture in America that just seeks to repress that sort of thing. So getting to the point where you've even accepted it, in my opinion, is a huge thing, and that you've accepted it and you've embraced it, even being closeted. And your reasons for being closeted are completely legit. You can still be of help to other people who are struggling with maybe figuring out if they are transgender. You can talk to people and still be a great help to folks. Don't underestimate yourself.
And I think people wanting you to come out as they're not meaning it out of a harmful thing. They definitely want to see you happy. But you got to go at your own pace. I
think it's important to recognize that a lot of times good intentions doesn't necessarily mean good outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think well-meaning people can, well, what can I do to help you come out? And, and it can feel like pressure, even if it's not meant to. And I think it's important for people to recognize that it's not what can I help you do loaded with the specific action that I want you to take. It's how can I support you? How can I help you? How can I be there for you? Period. And whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to come out in 2 weeks, cool, let's figure out a plan to do that. If you don't want to come out and you're just trying to figure life out, cool, how can I help you figure that life out? You know what I mean? Like we shouldn't be pushing towards one thing or another. Aside from to say, I want you to do the thing that's going to make you happy and the thing that's going to make you comfortable with yourself, and whatever action that is, that's what I want to support you in doing.
Yeah, and that makes me think about earlier when I said coming out is the goal. Well, the goal really is to come to terms with yourself. Coming out is something that we should all be able to do eventually. And hopefully that's the world that we're building now, where we can all do that. Because at least even without the fanfare of coming out, at least being open about who you are, that's not the road we live in yet. So sometimes those closets you have to stay in them for a little bit longer.
Right.
So I'd like to clarify that.
The day that this show is no longer needed, that's the day that we win.
And we can do a podcast where we talk about
yes, Janeway rules.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to thank my co-hosts Daniel and Jonathan.
My pleasure.
Yep, thank you.
As well as Lydia, Allan, and Danielle Muscato for taking the time to join us. They're both incredibly busy people, and it was really, really cool of them to have given their time to us. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali.
Daniel, I'm on Twitter at Daniel Wolfsong.
And I, Jonathan, am on Twitter at NerdCub. That's with a K.
And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, and knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.